number one. So today we're willing to give all of you an insight into the world of Vedic astrology. Now when you think of Vedic astrology and when you think of astrology in general, one thing I'd like to say is that it's not being used to its actual purpose in our society these days. I mean, when you think of astrology, you think of who's going to be the next top politician in the country, or when you think of astrology, you think of who's going to win the next lottery. And like I said, it's not being harnessed to its full potential in the society these days. However, this field of Vedic astrology, which is quite different from Western astrology, this field of Vedic astrology, the history of it dates back to thousands of years. And of course, Vedic astrology is quite different from Western astrology, if you all have heard about it. Because in Vedic astrology, the planets that you find, as well as the entire system that is used to analyze a birth chart in Vedic astrology differs from that in Western astrology. So when you look at Vedic astrology, which I will be giving all of y'all an in-depth analysis of Vedic astrology in videos that we will be doing in the future as well. But today I just wanted to give all of y'all a rough outline of what Vedic astrology is, as well as about the planets, the various planets that are discussed in this subject of Vedic astrology. Now when it comes to Vedic astrology, you guys all must have seen a birth chart if you live in either Sri Lanka, India, Nepal, or any part of Asia, or even in any part of sometimes even parts of Europe. You all must have seen what a birth chart looks like. So a typical Vedic astrology birth chart has 12 houses. There's your ascendant sign, and with that there are 12 houses. And in those 12 astrological houses, or they are even sometimes called as planetary houses. In these houses you find several planets that are placed in these houses. So out of that, in Vedic astrology, we give an utmost significance to the Navagraha, also known as the 9 most important planets. All right. So if you ask me to name them in order, they would be the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, the North Node Rahu, and the South Node Ketu. All right. Now the North Node Rahu and the South Node Ketu, they are defined as shadow planets, meaning they do not actually exist in this universe. They don't even have an actual physical body. They are more of a hypothetical thing. So like I said, when it comes to Vedic astrology, we give prior significance to the Navagraha, that is the 9 planets that I mentioned here. Now when it comes to planets like Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, they do not possess that much of a significance in the field of Vedic astrology. However, they do seem to possess some sort of significance in the field of Western astrology. All right. But in Vedic astrology, we mainly use these 9 planets to state any sort of astrological predictions. All right. So today we will be looking at a very brief idea on what each and every one of these 9 planets represent in Vedic astrology. Now we'll start off with the most important planet, that is the Sun. The Sun in Vedic astrology is one of the most important planets, all right, because the Sun, sometimes you all must have noted, if you live in Asia or even in part of Europe also, sometimes an astrologer can use the placement of Sun in your particular birth chart to even state your time of birth. All right. There are tricks when it comes to reading a birth chart. There are tricks to identify a person's birth time and so many other things using a birth chart. So one planet that is mainly used when it comes to identifying a person's time of birth, or at least approximate time of birth, is the planet Sun. And the planet Sun has an utmost significance in the field of Vedic astrology. The planet Sun represents authority in the field of Vedic astrology. The planet Sun, if I am to name what are the things that the planet Sun represents, the planet Sun represents authority, the planet Sun represents leadership. Sun is your fatherly figure. Sun also represents the government, and the Sun also, in medical astrology, the Sun also represents a person's eyesight. The Sun also represents a person's heart and blood vessels as well. So likewise, each and every planet in Vedic astrology represents various things, and these are just a few of what planet Sun actually represents. But so likewise, each and every planet has its own significance and represents several factors. So when a particular planet is should I say not placed in a good way in a particular birth chart, it results in problems associated to what that planet represents. For example, if your planet Sun in your birth chart is let's say not placed in a good way, or if the Sun is placed in a malefic way in your birth chart, then since the Sun represents eyesight, this will most probably result in you having a weakened eyesight. That doesn't necessarily mean that you will go blind, but at least you will have to wear a pair of spectacles. And since the Sun also represents your fatherly figure, when the Sun is we say hemmed between malefics or receiving malefic aspects from other planets, or basically when Sun is not positioned in a good way, this will result in problems between you and your father as well. And the Sun also represents government. So when Sun is placed in a good sort of way in your birth chart, this will mainly result in you having some sort of occupation which is related to the government, or should I say any job that is related to the government sector. So likewise, that's what the planet Sun represents. Next we are going to move on to the next planet, that is the planet Moon. Now the planet Moon is quite different from the planet Sun in Vedic astrology, since Sun represents everything that is authority. Sun represents leadership. However, Moon is the exact opposite. The planet Moon in Vedic astrology represents compassion. Moon represents your emotion, Moon represents your feelings, Moon represents kindness, Moon also represents water. And basically the planet Moon in Vedic astrology basically relates to your mind. Now when I say mind, I don't mean your intelligence, alright. There's a different planet which represents your intelligence, but what I mean is your mind. That means your feelings, your emotions. What exactly do you feel when your best friend is scolding you? What exactly do you feel just before you go to sleep every day? So likewise, the planet Moon is a very significant planet in Vedic astrology, because the planet Moon represents your emotion, your feelings. This is why when the planet Moon is receiving some sort of malefic aspect, or is not placed in a good way in a person's birth chart, this will result in certain problems which will really affect the mentality or the happiness of a particular person. And the Moon also represents water, and the Moon also represents anything that is a liquid. So when Moon is let's say placed in your 10th house in your birth chart, which is related to your job and job related matters, these people mainly they will do some sort of job that is related to water, or that is related to liquids. What do I mean by that? Anything that has to do with water. Basically, it could be a sailor, it could be a swimmer, it could be someone who is selling fuel or some sort of water, some sort of juice, any sort of liquid. So basically anything that is related to liquid. But however, there are various things that affect a particular planetary combination. This is just a rough outline of what these planets represent, and for you all to get a brief insight into the world of Vedic astrology. Now when you move on to the next planet, Mars. Now the planet Mars is also a very significant planet, because the planet Mars in Vedic astrology represents strength. Mars represents aggression. Mars represents fighting, and we represent Mars as a soldier. We represent Mars as a soldier whose only purpose is to fight, or basically get everything that he wants using his strength. So this is why when planet Mars is placed in a really good beneficial way in a person's birth chart, this will result in person being somewhat of a soldier type figure. What do I mean by a soldier type figure? Is he's a warrior. Basically, he is someone who will fight. He is someone who will fight for his family. He is someone who will fight to fulfill his desires. He could even he could even do a job in the army. He could even be joining the military. But basically, he is somewhat of a fighter. No matter what he does, he has a strong willpower. His mentality is equal to that of a soldier. He'll never back down from a challenge. He will show you what real aggression and what real passion represents, what real passion looks like. So basically, the planet Mars represents passion in Vedic astrology. And also, when Mars is placed in somewhat of a bad way in a person's birth chart, this will result in certain drastic consequences, because since I said now Mars represents a soldier, what happens when a soldier goes into battle? Yes, when a soldier goes into battle, he will be wounded. He will be there will be certain wounds, cuts, bruises, burns, and he might even die. So just like that, when the planet Mars is placed in a bad way in a person's birth chart, and when he's spending the Mars dasha and so on, then there's a very high probability for him to undergo certain types of surgeries, or for him to have certain encounters which will result in him having certain wounds, certain bruises, where you'll have to visit your surgeon for an important surgery, or basically it will result in harm to your body. Alright, so that's what the planet Mars represents. And when we move on to the next planet, the planet Mercury. Now the planet Mercury in Vedic astrology represents your intelligence. The planet Mercury in your Vedic astrology represents your speech. The planet Mercury also represents your creativity as well to some extent, and in certain cases it also represents your childish figure. Alright, Mercury is somewhat of a childish figure. Alright, when Mercury is placed in a bad way in a person's birth chart, and when Mercury is receiving certain malefic aspects, this will result in a person being a bit of a childish personality, I should say. But basically the planet Mercury represents intelligence as well. The planet Mercury represents intelligence as well. It definitely represents your thinking, your intellect, your thinking capacity as well. This is why when Mercury is placed in such a good way in a person's birth chart, this will result in the person having a lot of intellect, or being somewhat of an intelligent person, as well as he has a strong passion towards education. He has a strong passion towards writing, speaking, and anything to do with education basically. So when Mercury is related to your 10th house of occupation in your birth chart, this might even result in you being somewhat of a teacher, or a teacher like figure. Basically someone with a lot of knowledge, and someone with a lot of intelligence, who is willing to give all that intelligence to the outside world. The planet Mercury in medical astrology represents your nervous system. The planet Mercury also represents your tongue. The planet Mercury also represents your skin as well. So when Mercury is associated to your 6th house in a birth chart, which represents the diseases that you may be prone to, or the diseases that you will be developing in the future, this will result in certain diseases in regards to the nervous system. Yes, Parkinson's. Yes, cerebral palsy, like that. So that's what the planet Mercury represents. And the planet Jupiter in Vedic astrology represents a spiritual figure. Alright, the planet Jupiter in Vedic astrology represents a spiritual figure, someone like a monk. Alright, someone that you look up to, someone with a lot of respect that you may look up to. Basically the planet Jupiter in Vedic astrology represents everything that is holy, even in Lord Buddha's chart. Who he was born as a Cancer ascendant, Lord Buddha had the planet Jupiter placed in his ascendant sign in a very powerful way. That's why he became somewhat of a spiritual figure, and also somewhat of a teacher figure. This is why the planet Jupiter in Vedic astrology represents a teacher. The planet Jupiter in Vedic astrology also represents certain things like educating others. It also represents religion. It also represents anything that is holy, anything that is spiritual as well as the planet Jupiter also represents your cholesterol levels. It represents your the fat that you have in your body. This is why when Jupiter is placed in a bad way and when you're spending Jupiter dasha, you will be having high cholesterol levels, fatty liver, which might even result in you having something like a heart attack as well. But however, the planet Jupiter usually, if it's placed in a good way in a person's birth chart, this will basically result in a teacher-like figure who is somewhat of an honest figure as well, somewhat of an honest, respectable figure as well. So when we move on to the next planet, that is the planet Venus. Now, the planet Venus in Vedic astrology represents love. The planet Venus in Vedic astrology represents your sensual desires. The planet Venus in your birth chart represents your sexual desires as well, and the planet Venus in your birth chart represents your enjoyment as well. This is why when Venus is placed in somewhat of a bad way in a person's birth chart also, this will result in problems in related to his sensual desires. Either he won't be fulfilling his sensual desires, or either he is fulfilling his sensual desires in an excessive way. For example, he is drinking too much of alcohol, he is addicted to drugs, which will result in several drastic consequences. And the planet Venus also represents love. This is why when Venus is placed in the 7th house of marriage also, you are somewhat of someone who is seeking for a lot of love. As well as when planet Venus is placed in a not so good manner, this will result in certain relationship problems as well. And the Venus in a male's birth chart represents your spouse as well. And when you move on to the next planet, that is the planet Saturn, one of the most feared planets in Vedic astrology. Now, the planet Saturn in Vedic astrology represents sadness. The planet Saturn in a person's birth chart represents his delays. The planet Saturn represents pain. The planet Saturn represents hard work. And the planet Saturn also represents discipline, as well as it also represents, when it comes to medical astrology, it represents your bones, your teeth, and so on. So when Saturn is placed in a good way in a person's birth chart, he will be somewhat of a disciplined person. He will be somewhat of a devotee of religion as well, but he is somewhat of a disciplined person. And since the planet Saturn represents sadness, he is someone who with a lot of inner strength. No matter whatever the sadness is, he is someone who can withstand all of that, and he is someone who, I should say, is someone with a strong personality. However, when Saturn is placed in a bad way in a person's birth chart, this will result in him having excessive problems that will affect his physicality, problems that will affect his mentality, his emotion, basically a lot of sadness. So since Saturn represents sadness, having a bad Saturn is certainly not something that I would want, because it will result in certain problems, should I say a world of problems. And then when we give a rough idea about the two shadow planets, that is Rahu and Ketu, the north node of the moon and the south node of the moon. Basically, the north node of the moon, Rahu, represents a headless body, and in certain Vedic astrology books, they call Rahu as somewhat of an illusion or somewhat of a smoke figure as well. This is why when Rahu's dasha is being spent, and when Rahu is being placed in a bad way in a person's birth chart, there will be certain illusions in his there will be certain illusions that he may be developing. For example, he may be thinking that, hey, I want something, because for example, if you equally to say, let's say, a love affair, so someone who is spending Rahu's dasha will be saying, hey, I want this girl, she is the world to me, she is everything that I ever wanted. However, later he will be knowing that whatever he thought in the past was nothing but a mere illusion. So basically, the planet Rahu represents a pure illusion. And then we will be talking about these planets in detail in the upcoming videos as well. And lastly, the planet Ketu in Vedic astrology represents secrets. Ketu represents everything that is mysterious. Ketu represents everything that you want to hide from the others. Ketu represents your innermost secrets. This is why when Ketu is is placed in the 4th house, that represents your feelings also. You are someone of an introverted personality, you don't like to share your feelings with others. So like that we will be having an in-depth analysis of each and every planet in the upcoming video. So this is just a rough outline of what these planets represent and what Vedic astrology is. So till we meet again, thank you.